Hello world, welcome to the next sprint demo for the OMB e-regulations project, concluding Spaghetti Sprint on Friday, December 15th. Will Sullivan, project manager for the team. We're going to show you the work that we've completed the last 2 weeks. You can also, this recording, this is a live stream, is a recording that you can go back and watch, link to share with friends and family, coworkers, colleagues. It's public on the internet. And you can also go back and see our previous demos in the playlist on this channel on YouTube. So feel free to do that, share it, learn, and come on us with this journey. So we're going to rock and roll, dive right into the demo, and I'm going to toss to Ryan.
Hello. Share my screen here. All right, so in this last sprint, we for design, the most noticeable visual change, the two probably largest changes are we shifted to a black header. I was kind of looking at the mark or the badge or seal that we use, and I think there was a navy up here, but I was looking at this and I was thinking, I don't really see any navy. So, and there's something about the black, the authority of the black that feels good to me, so I'm going to give that a whirl. Secondly, we have a nav design both for desktop and for mobile, which CM will be getting to later. We also took some time to cull down the color palette. We kind of had a lot of stray colors from previous whatever framework that we were using, and plus colors I had thrown in there, and so we CM and I culled those down to a solid. I think we had like 45 or something, and we got down to like 12-ish. And then I think that actually might be it. Oh, and I also built a library, Sketch. We were finally able to update Sketch. And Sketch has this cool library feature, so we can have these remote libraries, which I call the OMB UI components. And I can drop in a, let's just try this here. Let's say we knew we wanted to change our footer. And so here's the footer, and I drop it in here, and I find out that I want to change it, and I can try and change it, and it says, hey, this is not, this is linked to a bigger thing, and so I can open it, and I can say, you know what, this is black, we don't want black, we want to go back to the navy. And so I can choose our navy color, and then or blue or whatever. And then I can hit save, and I can close it. And when I jump back to my document, this little purple guy, a little subtle guy up here in the far right, and it even shows me, this is amazing, not to be able to see, oh, I see what's changed, and I can accept or not. And you hit update, and then boop. And this would happen in all the documents, so it's super cool. That is all. I think CM is next. If I could stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, sir. I will share my screen. It's vengeance. So I'm going to be covering the work of the developers today. So this is 4 different people, so it's actually quite a bit of content. I'll try to go through and point out just highlight things. So the first thing that I would like to talk about is that navigation. So we have, you can see that the design for this page changed slightly, where we've got more white space on the left and more white space on the right. And we filled that left with a in-document nav. We may use the right for something in the future. This in-document nav will stick with the user as they scroll and will highlight their position within the document as they scroll. You can use it to jump around. You can go to the footer, etc. It also works on mobile, or rather small screens. But in that case, it's not going to be docked on the left because we don't have any page there. It's actually going to dock to the top of the screen. And we can still do the same, scroll around. Good stuff. Further, this navigation works without JavaScript, so I've turned off JavaScript. which is both for older browsers, but also browsers that have a broken version of JavaScript. So particularly like if you're using IE 7 or 8, you won't have as much activity happening on the page. And so we want to be able to support those users as well. And how we do that is to basically make it so it's not sticky, but it is still available for the users to click around. Similarly, if they have a small screen and they have an old device, then the menu's at the top of the page and they can scroll through. Speaking of non-JavaScript users, we had the ability this last sprint to, if the user did not have JavaScript and they clicked these footnote citations, they would jump down to the bottom of the page where the footnote was. We didn't have the ability for them to jump back. And we've added that this sprint so that if they click the number down here, they go to the footnote in the document. Of course, if they do have JavaScript enabled, then when they do the citation, they see the footnote inline. One other bit that changed here that isn't visible, we've added the ability to have inline citations. And these are ways to describe text that's referring to something else. So not necessarily something that's a link, but just like the name of a book, something like that. And by keeping these semantic, we'll be able to query these and find out like what's the most cited book or something along those lines. So those are the changes to the viewer. I'm also going to be representing changes to the importer today. So this is M1619. This is the PDF. We know it, we love it. This is our example document that we use to test out all sorts of things. We had shown last sprint, a tool had built this prototype that pulled the text out of this PDF and turned it into, in this case, HTML. And so you can see it's relatively accurate, which we would expect because this is our demonstration document. This sprint, we built an interface that allows us to figure out what's going on a little bit better. So you can see in the background here is that PDF, the same document. And overlaid on top of it are highlighted colors, which indicate the type of text that we think this is. So notably, these are headings. This is a paragraph. Orange means footnotes. So we can see headings, paragraphs, and that's what lets us figure out, all right, this is going to be a heading versus this is a paragraph, footnote, etc. So having this sort of structure, here's a list item. Having this sort of structure will tell us where that importing process breaks down. So for example, here is another document which largely works, but you'll notice that it thinks that this is not, this red bit in the middle is not a list item. Similarly, it thinks that the first line in this paragraph is part of the list item. So this helps us debug this. You can see varying levels of support. Now, of course, we need to balance between making this more and more accurate and other features that we want to build, but this gives us the ability to debug. Having a good sense of the types of text makes the editor's job much easier because they don't have to then figure out this was a list item originally, this was a header originally. It pulls that information to them. However, I did want to note that in addition to problems importing types of content, we'll have problems with the text itself occasionally. So this is a PDF that was printed and then scanned. You can tell because if you look down here, you see just little printing artifacts, like it was tried to print in one place and then the paper moved slightly, so it kept printing elsewhere. And that means that this document was OCR'd, optical character recognition, taking an image and turning it into text. And in these types of documents where it wasn't there was never the original text, we don't have that anymore. We just have an image that the text has been pulled out of. It's much more likely that there's going to be errors. And the errors will be much more subtle. So for example, here we have M1L29. That's because if you look at this, it's ever so slightly different than the one prior. And you'll see little tildes and things like that throughout the document. So just a heads up that as we work through this, it's more and more apparent that not only will we have to worry about the types of content, but we will be requiring that editors actually review the content itself. So like that squiggly agency CIO became this, and it thought it was a tilde. So these are subtle, but they will need to be checked. Following that, so now I've covered, I think, 3 of the developers' times, and I'm on the 4th. I will present this short slide, which is kind of our position in terms of importing these PDFs, how that fits into the wider picture. So last sprint, a tool developed this prototype, which I showed you the output for a little bit earlier. This sprint, we integrated that into the rest of our stack. You can imagine that the tools needed to build a prototype don't match the tools needed for a production application. So we're now working on the same code base, and we've started the process of integrating that with our data so that the importer spits out the content to the database. As we do that, we actually gain the ability to view that data through the viewer for free, because it's the same database structure. And once we have that database structure, we can start to work on saving and displaying inside the editor. So the filled circles means that we've accomplished that. We're part of the way through integrating data, and we're going to start on both displaying the content in the editor and saving the content roughly next sprint. And with that, I think I'm handing it over to Austin.
Me, yes, thank you. Let me share my screen. Woo. All right, can you all see my screen?
Yep.
Cool. Okay, so this is all about what we did with importing and authoring tools, the research that we did to do the designs. So this is a bit of background. We spoke to 3 different policy analysts from OMB, and all of the participants were responsible for writing policies in their respective agencies and then getting it online. And from there, and then as part of that interview process, we developed this clickable prototype to walk them through so we could get feedback on that. We were hoping to uncover these major questions, which are like, what are things that we need to develop as part of the importer process, and where are they having the biggest pain points, and some things that they need to complete when they are uploading policy to a library, and what could make their process and their jobs easier. So the questions that we had when we did the interview protocol was like, what is the current way of inputting requirements? And we did that by in usability testing. We were doing a bit of interviewing at the beginning to talk through what the current process looked like. We got walked through from soup to nuts how a policy gets written, the approval processes that they go through, and then uploading that into the library, selecting requirements, etc. And then, does the upload policy prototype make sense to users, and what problems did they run into? So these were, well, we showed them a prototype that I had made in Sketch and InVision to kind of do a baseline task flow that we could show participants as a way to get initial feedback on things that we could start developing on. We would know we were successful when, without prompting, they were able to articulate a process or a functionality that would help them do their jobs better. So things that we had left out, or how do I accomplish this task that I'll need to do for my workflow. And then the last bit is, are they able to complete the task of uploading and editing a policy? So we were just trying to see if they could go through the flow with a success rate of uploading a policy, viewing it, and then submitting it. So the first one I'll walk through is what's the current way of inputting requirements. So I think the main feedback that we got from everybody was that it was time consuming and cumbersome. So I pulled out some of these user quotes here about it was just a long process, the old way of inputting policies into the database. And while talking through users of like their day-to-day, what they're going through, we realized that they were relying very heavily on internal knowledge. So if they didn't know the answer to a specific question, that expertise lived within the office, and that there was a lot of approval QA systems that needed to happen. Things had to be printed, shown. Every comment that was given on a particular policy had to be reviewed by several people. And also that there was a lot of difference between OMB offices. So one participant remarked that the OFCIO has kind of bigger dreams than what they're looking for in their office. They're happy to just have a library that lets people sort and search on already released policies, while OFCIO might have, an alert for another meeting. So while OFCIO might have more future thinking needs. Oh, yeah. So here in the notes, I have that we did an exercise where we synthesized some of those feedback, like levels of feedback. So we did this task flow of our participants and kind of saw what their current process looked like outside of the library, how they got stuff into the library, and then marked things that had to be done in duplicate or had to be done in or repeat instances, and then pain points. So we did that practice with all three of our participants, pulled out quotes, and then walked the development team and product part of the teams through each of these pain points so that everyone could get an idea of what the scope of the project was and what our users were going through. So the second part that we were trying to answer during this phase was, if they look at the prototype, what problems are they looking for? What things haven't we taken into consideration with this first level version? And that was just, does this simple flow make sense? Simple being, it's not simple for everybody, but simple like taking out a lot of extraneous information. Going from uploading a policy, selecting it in your browser, viewing the original, editing it, selecting a requirement, being able to view both the physical document and the text document, and then a success screen. And I think like all of the participants said that they liked this flow, that it was simple and straightforward, that it was a lot easier than the current process in comparison to the old process. All the participants said that it was great. It looked promising and a lot easier to use in comparison to the old, and just in general for teaching a straightforward interface that they were used to. Observations that users liked on this were that they liked intermediate states for different reasons, and that they like to save as a draft feature so they could come back to policies or share that policy out or get ahead of other approval processes. But I think a lot of people were unaware of the amount of manual work of editing. So you saw in the demo that Atul was working on at CM presented that there was a lot of errors that were returning on these OCR documents. So I think there was a lot of trust and accuracy for the computer, that the computer would get this right. So comments like, I don't know how you got from here to here, but I trust it. And then the unclear on where the final button submit to approver. People had different ideas for if it would go to a system admin or it would go to maybe their boss, or it would just go straight to the library and be viewable by the public. The last thing that we were testing for is, are they able to complete the task of uploading a policy? And yes, but there was all that confusion before about where things would go and some wording. So the next phase of recommendations would be to consider more options for explicit step-by-step, and make people understand that there would be a level of manual work that will have to do with cross-checking the references, that it wasn't implicit in the task, the original flow. The second one would be getting a workable prototype like the one that Atul had developed, where we can get that in front of users and see if it's indeed easier to correct tools that might be, or errors that might be in the text versus writing your own text from scratch. And it seems like we're on the right track. We need to just keep improving and building, deciding what we're going to build first. So the next steps we're going to take are improving that task flow, coming up with a V2 of prototyping, and then working on an MVP. So what the team started to do, we haven't yet finished. It was like a 2-part episode to be continued. We started mapping out this importer story mapping session. So basically we took all of the commonalities in process and put them in here at this user sequence. So things that are mandatory in the process of getting from what policies to upload to what policy is going to be published. And we brainstormed yesterday of things that we are pretty confident can get accomplished in a 3 to 6 month period. And then we need to work out on the product side how feasible, how desirable things are before we start developing them. And from these, we can develop user stories and start making more smart decisions on what we're going to prototype. And that is it. I will stop sharing and pass it to Carolyn.
Hello. I was going to have a brief update on the user research we've been doing for the policy detail page. We can progress to that one. Yep. So what we've been doing is we've been reaching out to folks, the folks that we had reached out to previously, but we hadn't been able to schedule before, and wanted to test some work that we had done on a mocking up a prototype of the anchor links for the paragraphs, as well as the within document navigation, which you saw a preview of when CM was presenting, the lovely side navigation with the headers. And these were the framing questions we set out to. Now, we had some issues with recruiting. We had a number of no-shows. We had fewer respondents. And also, as we were going through the sprint, we decided that some of the importer research and synthesis, et cetera, was a higher priority and perhaps deserved a little more focus. So what ended up happening is we've had 2 usability tests so far. Each user sort of represented opposite ends of the spectrum, in which one person went through the prototype with almost 0 problems and almost 0 issues, and then the other person perceived things pretty differently than what we had intended. So the moral of the story is we are not at a point where we can draw conclusions. So what the plan is at this point is we are going to continue recruiting and try to schedule some interviews for the next week, and if possible through the holiday season, knowing that a lot of people will be out. In the meantime, like still supporting continuing the work on the importer flow. So I wanted to give you that update to know that so that you know that there are things going on, and that we will continue working on it. And I am excited to get to a place where we can synthesize and share those results. And that's what I got. I will pass it back to Will.
Thank you. So we're going to wrap up here. Our next demo will be January 5th. So we're doing a 3-week sprint this time due to a lot of vacation and holiday joy going on with the New Year and Christmas and Hanukkah and Kwanzaa and all that fun. So we'll be back Friday, January 5th with more demo for you to see. And now we'll go into our fun call-in session. You can go ahead and hang up this YouTube video, go ahead and close it out, and dial into the phone number in box number 2. And we'll take feedback, answer questions, talk about our holiday plans, talk about what are the next sort of things to take on in this longer but deceptively longer sprint coming up, and especially discuss sort of a little bit of a timeline for next features and how to prepare the next steps. So dial on in. I will join you there. I'll keep this up for a couple minutes while you folks dial in, and we'll see you on the conference line. If not, have a happy and safe holiday season and see you in the new year.